"What would you do if you'd done everything right? Reported the fraud, followed every policy, put your name on the line, and they destroyed you for it anyway." That's where Sloane Mercer found herself at 26. Not a naive kid, not someone who hadn't thought things through. A forensic accountant with 4 years of careful, documented, methodical work. The kind of person whose instinct is to write everything down and keep copies. And they still burned her to the ground. She'd joined Hartley and Associates straight out of Ryerson. The firm was mid-sized, respectable on paper, based in Calgary. They did real estate acquisitions, land development, commercial property management across the prairies. Vincent Hartley ran it. He'd inherited it from his father, who'd built it up from something his own father had started back in the 70s. 3 generations of Hartleys, a name that opened doors across Alberta and Saskatchewan. For 3 years, Sloane was exactly the kind of employee firms love. Quiet, thorough, always early. She didn't socialize much. She'd grown up in Sudbury with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who cleared out before she was 10, and she'd learned early that nobody was going to hand her anything. Everything she had, she'd worked for. The first thing she noticed was in a pile of environmental assessments she was cross-referencing against acquisition costs. A parcel of land north of Medicine Hat, sold to a retired couple in their 70s for a condo development investment, had a Phase 1 environmental report dated 2019. But buried in the firm's internal documents was a Phase 2 report from 2021, flagged confidential, not for disclosure, showing severe petroleum hydrocarbon contamination. The couple had signed. They didn't know. Sloane flagged it internally, wrote it up carefully, kept a copy on her personal drive, sent it to the compliance officer. Nothing happened. She found 3 more. She went to Vincent directly. He listened to her with the particular patience of a man who has no intention of doing what you're asking. Then he thanked her for her due diligence, told her the assessments were under legal review, and sent her back to her desk. 2 weeks later, she was called into HR. Performance issues, they said. Attitude problems. Difficulty working within the team structure. She was given 60 days' notice. She knew immediately it wasn't 60 days. She was walked out the next morning. What followed was the part nobody warns you about. She filed a complaint with the Alberta Securities Commission. The firm's lawyers filed a counterclaim alleging she had accessed confidential documents without authorization. Her professional association launched a review. Within 4 months, every door she knocked on in Calgary had quietly shut. Vincent had friends. He sat on 2 charitable boards and a university advisory committee. People in that world take care of each other. By the time the ASC complaint stalled in bureaucratic review, Sloane had $2,800 in her account, a sublet notice on her apartment, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from working hard, but from fighting in a rigged ring. She drove east, not toward anything, just away. She ended up in a town called Biggar, Saskatchewan, population under 2,000, famous mainly for a road sign that reads "New York is big, but this is Biggar." She was parked outside at Tim Hortons at 7 in the morning, drinking coffee she could barely afford, when she noticed a photocopied notice taped inside the window of the municipal office across the street. Tax sale auction. That afternoon, she went in because it was warm and she had nowhere to be. The auction room smelled like floor wax and old paper, farmers in Carhartt jackets, a couple of real estate speculators in down vests who looked bored, a local lawyer running the proceedings from a folding table. Most of the properties went quickly. A vacant lot, a foreclosed acreage, a commercial strip in town that sold for $40,000 without much drama. Then the auctioneer reached item 11. Lot 11. Carver Grain Storage Facility, County Road 12, approximately 4.8 acres. Building condemned 1987. No agricultural designation, listed as structural hazard. Opening bid $2,800. The room went quiet the way rooms do when something is understood to be worthless. Sloane looked down at her coffee cup. She thought about the $2,800 in her account. She thought about the fact that she had a forensic accountant's mind in a body that had run out of places to go. She thought about Vincent Hartley thanking her for her diligence. She raised her hand. Nobody bid against her. The auctioneer looked mildly confused but completed the sale. After fees, she had $43. The Carver facility was 8 kilometers outside of town, down a gravel road that rattled her Civic hard enough to make her teeth ache. When she arrived, she sat in the car for a long time without getting out. It had been a grain storage operation once, a squat, flat-roofed concrete block building surrounded by rusted corrugated steel bins, half of which had collapsed inward. A chain-link fence around the property was mostly standing, but the gate hung off one hinge. Inside the main building, chunks of ceiling plaster had come down over decades, and the floor was a drift of old chaff, rodent droppings, and broken glass. The windows had been boarded over sometime in the 90s, and the boards had warped. She drove back to the Tim Hortons and used their Wi-Fi to post her car for sale online. The car sold 2 days later for $1,900 to a farm equipment dealer in Outlook. She used the money to buy a sleeping bag, a propane camping stove, a heavy-duty flashlight, and 2 weeks of groceries. She pitched a tarp in the corner of the main building, where the ceiling was still mostly intact, and she got a job washing dishes at the only diner in Biggar. The locals were not unkind, but they were watchful. The dishwasher who lived in the old Carver building. That was who she was now. One Sunday in late October, 3 weeks after she'd moved in, Sloane was clearing debris from the back corner of the building, not out of any particular optimism, just because the smell in that corner was worse than the rest, and she needed to find out why, when she moved a collapsed shelving unit and found something underneath it. Specifically, she found a seam in the floor, a rectangle roughly 2 meters by 1, cut into the concrete, with a recessed iron pull ring flush against the surface. She stared at it for a while, then she pulled on it. The trapdoor was heavy, but its hinges had been sealed with some kind of industrial grease that had kept them from corroding entirely. It came up slowly, and then all at once, a set of wooden steps descended into darkness. The beam of her flashlight found a room below approximately the size of a large bedroom. The floor was packed earth. The walls were poured concrete, heavily insulated with fiberglass batting that had yellowed but held, and on a shelf along the far wall, sealed in a row of military surplus waterproof ammunition cans, were documents. She was a forensic accountant. She knew exactly what she was looking at. The first can held rubber-banded stacks of currency, Canadian dollars from the early 1970s, deteriorated and worthless now, but clearly once a significant sum. The second held handwritten ledgers, the entries dated between 1969 and 1973. They were records of cash transactions, coded but not particularly cleverly, the kind of bookkeeping someone does when they want a record for themselves, but think no one else will ever see it. The third can was sealed differently, a rubber gasket around the lid, held down with a clip. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a set of legal documents. Sloane sat down on the earthen floor and read them. It took her an hour. By the end, her hands were steady. She was a forensic accountant. Steadiness was professional conditioning. But the inside of her chest felt like a weather system. The documents were a series of land transfer agreements dated 1971, covering approximately 5,800 acres of land in the Qu'Appelle Valley. The agreements bore the signatures of 3 elders of the Nakota Nation, transferring surface rights to a company called Hartley Prairie Holdings Limited for a recorded consideration of $1 per acre. Beside each elder's signature was a witness, C.H. Hartley, Notary Public. Clifton Hartley had witnessed the signatures. He had notarized the transfers. But Sloane had seen fraudulent document preparation before. She had written a 17-page internal report about it once. She looked at the paper fibers, the ink distribution, the pressure patterns of the signatures. Then she looked at the notarial stamp. The stamp was dated July 14, 1971. One of the elders whose signature appeared on the document was named in a separate enclosure, a handwritten note in the same hand as the ledgers. The note was a reminder to Clifton from himself. E. confirmed deceased March 1971. Signature obtained by proxy arrangement. Destroy this note. He had not destroyed the note. One of the three men whose signatures transferred 5,800 acres had been dead for 4 months when he supposedly signed. The land that Hartley Prairie Holdings Limited had acquired in 1971 was the foundation parcel of what became, over the next 50 years, the Hartley real estate empire. Vincent had not inherited a business. He had inherited a fraud. Sloane photographed every document with her phone. Then she photographed them again. She was pulling herself back through the trapdoor when she heard a truck on the gravel road. It was a black pickup, late model, idling at the gate. The windows were tinted. It sat there for 40 seconds, engine running. Then it backed up and drove away. Sloane climbed back down into the basement and sat in the dark for 20 minutes, thinking. The next morning, she walked to the diner early and sat in the corner booth before her shift started, using the Wi-Fi. It took her 40 minutes to find what she was looking for. Hartley and Associates' current property portfolio listed holdings in the Capel Valley region, the same region. Current assessed value of those holdings, approximately $340 million. She was still sitting there when Earl Macpherson came inside for his regular coffee. Earl was 68, a third-generation grain farmer with a face like cracked leather and the measured speech of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that mattered. He'd spoken to Sloane twice before, once to tell her the pothole on County Road 12 swallowed transmissions, once to ask where she was from. He'd listened both times more than he talked. He sat across from her uninvited, looked at her expression, and said, "What happened?" It wasn't a question. She told him, all of it. Earl listened without interrupting. When she finished, he drank his coffee slowly. "The Nakoda claim on that valley land has been in legal review for 11 years, he said. My neighbor's granddaughter works for the nation's legal counsel in Regina. They've been saying for a decade that the original transfers were improper. Nobody's been able to prove it." He looked at her steadily. "You said you have photographs." "I have photographs." Then Earl said, "The first person you talk to is not the RCMP and it's not a newspaper." He meant the Nakoda Nation's legal team. He drove her to Regina the next day. Rowan Cheecham was 32, a land rights researcher with the nation's legal office, and when Sloane laid the photograph files across the conference table, Rowan went very still in the way people do when they're seeing something they've spent years looking for. They went through the documents for 6 hours. By the end, Rowan's hands were shaking slightly. Sloane's were not. "The notarial registration number on the 1971 transfer," Rowan said quietly. "We've been trying to trace Clifton Hartley's records for 8 years. The Law Society said they were destroyed in a fire." "He was keeping his own records," Sloane said, "in a sealed ammunition can in a condemned grain building." That evening, Sloane uploaded the full document archive to a cloud server and tied it to an automated distribution protocol, a habit of mind she'd developed after her ASC complaint went nowhere. If she failed to log in and enter a passkey every 24 hours, the archive would distribute automatically to the RCMP's Commercial Crime Division, to CBC Investigates, and to 3 national newspapers. Then she drove back to Biggar and waited. She didn't wait long. On the third morning, 3 vehicles appeared on County Road 12 before 7 a.m., 2 black SUVs and a silver sedan. Vincent stepped out of the sedan in a wool overcoat, the kind worn by men who believe their clothing communicates authority. He had the sharp, composed face of someone who has never had to be particularly patient about much. A lawyer flanked him. Behind the lawyer, 2 men whose function was made clear by their posture. Sloane was standing outside the building with her coffee as they walked up the gravel drive. "Mrs. Mercer," Vincent said. Her name in his mouth had the quality of something being assessed. I understand you've settled into our family's old storage property. We have some sentimental attachment to this parcel. I'd like to make you a generous offer. Your family's property, Sloane said. Right. $450,000, Vincent said. Cash settlement, clean title transfer, signed today. 6 months ago, that number would have changed the shape of her life entirely. She thought about the retired couple in Medicine Hat. She thought about the other couples she'd found in the files. She thought about Rowan Cheecham going still at a conference table in Regina. The property isn't for sale, she said. Vincent's composure thinned slightly. Mrs. Mercer, you are a disbarred accountant living in a condemned building in rural Saskatchewan. You filed a complaint that went nowhere. I am offering you the ability to simply walk away with something real. I already walked away with something real, she said, from the basement. The composure didn't just thin, it cracked. Whatever you think you found, Vincent said, his voice dropping, is property of Hartley Holdings. This was our facility. Whatever was stored here. The Law Society might have an interesting opinion about that, Sloane said, given that Clifton Hartley kept his own notarial records in a sealed ammunition can, including a handwritten note about obtaining a signature from a man who'd been dead for 4 months. That's the kind of thing the RCMP's commercial crime unit tends to find interesting. So does CBC Investigates. They'll have the full archive in about 22 hours, unless I enter my passkey. She held up her phone. The screen showed a timer. Vincent stood completely still. The wool overcoat didn't move. The flat Saskatchewan sky didn't move. Then Earl's half-ton came down the road and pulled up beside the gate. And Earl stepped out and folded his arms on the roof of the cab, watching. In the particular way of a man who grew up in a place where everybody knows everybody's business, and occasionally you need to be a witness to something. This is not over, Vincent said quietly. It's actually quite close to over, Sloane said. Here's what I want, not money. You're going to open a formal land restitution conversation with the Nakota Nation's legal team this week regarding the Qu'Appelle Valley parcels. You're going to disclose the contaminated sites to every buyer who wasn't told, and you're going to resign from Hartley and Associates. You do those 3 things, the archive stays sealed. You try to bury this or you try to bury me, and I don't enter my passkey. She let that settle. I'm a forensic accountant. I'm very good at keeping track of things. Vincent looked at her for a long moment, a man doing arithmetic on losses. He left without another word. The SUVs reversed together and moved off down the gravel road. Earl walked up the drive and stood beside her, watching the dust settle. That seemed like it went all right, he said. Ask me in 72 hours, she said. The letter of intent arrived in 61. Rowan called it one of the most significant voluntary disclosures in land restitution history in the province. The RCMP opened a formal investigation. 6 months later, Vincent stepped down from the firm. A federal inquiry into the 1971 transfers was announced the following spring, and the legal process of returning the Qu'Appelle Valley land to the Nakota Nation. Years of work, careful and slow, the way real things get done, finally began to move. Sloane stayed in Biggar through the winter. She opened a small practice above the credit union, mostly helping farmers untangle complicated estate paperwork. She was good at it. She had always been good at the quiet work of finding what had been deliberately hidden. She kept the Carver building. She didn't fix it up or sell it. She just kept it. Because Vincent had taken everything from her that could be taken through a screen or a legal filing or a phone call to the right people. He hadn't been able to touch this. $43 and a condemned concrete building on a gravel road. And it had been enough. You can't leverage away a thing like that. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If you'd found those documents in the dark, would you have taken the $450,000 and walked, or would you have stayed? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you would have done. And if Sloane's story hit you somewhere real, hit like, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to Claim the Drama. We've got more stories coming, and none of them are ones you'll want to miss.